Okay, it looks like it is time to begin. Just want to say welcome everybody to my very first live debugging session. In this session, what I'm going to do is I've taken, I think I have 6 examples of requests from viewers. They say they have some type of problem, and I'm just going to go through it, program by program, and walk you through the debugging process, and at least how I would debug the program. I'm not a professional coder by any stretch of the imagination. I'm a teacher, but this is the way I would do it, and it seems reasonably effective. So why don't we get started? And here we go. Here's the first example. This is from Ritu Chukla, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing anybody's names. So let's take a look. First thing I'm going to do is, well, usually the person will say, here's what the problem is, ideally. They've shared their code with me via pastebin.com, so I can download it and run it. If you paste it into the comments, it loses the formatting, and I can't really do anything with it. But yeah, so let's take a look. And I'm going to just go ahead and run it on my computer and see what happens. And I have 2 monitors, so I have to drag that down. So this is my Falling Skies program tutorial. So I'm looking at the program, and basically I can tell you, based on what this person has written to me already, he or she was saying that the left and right wasn't working, and so on my computer it is working. So after a little bit of further communication, what we found was that actually it was working perfectly, but that person's computer was really, really fast. So it just shot so fast off the screen they couldn't see what was going on. So here's what we can do with this to kind of change the speed at which it's moving. The first thing we can do is, you see here, they're using x equals x minus 1 to move left, which makes sense. We could try to change that to 0.01. And I'm going to do the same thing on right, and just see what happens. Let's run that. Okay, so now you can see it's moving at a much more reasonable pace. So that is one way to fix it, and probably actually the best way to fix it on a given computer at this point. One of the things with not using a game engine, just using the Turtle module, as I do with my tutorials, is the fact that every computer is a little bit different in speed. On my computer, it runs pretty fast. Apparently, on that person's computer, it runs really, really fast. Our school uses Macs. The Mac Turtle implementation tends to be a little bit slower, so the programs run a bit slower on, at least the Turtle module does, run slower on a Mac than it does on other platforms that I've tested, at least. So that is number 1. It wasn't really a syntax error. The program does keep working, which is cool, but it wasn't quite behaving how we wanted. Okay. So if you have any questions, feel free to comment in the chat, or to also just make sure, if you're not watching this before, please do subscribe to my channel, and hopefully get some good content. Let's take a look at number 2. So I'm going to run this, and this is from PISA, and we had quite a few back and forth with this person, but I think we got everything sorted. So I'm going to go ahead and run it. Okay, now you can't see it, but the window popped up, and we got an error message. And this is the kind of typical problem a beginner has. They type in the code, but they've typed something wrong, or they've missed a line, or just something isn't working. This is what we really wanted to look at today. Okay, so I'm going to look at the error message. Okay, so the traceback. So the computer, at least Python, it's trying to tell you what is wrong. So you need to really read these messages closely, read them carefully, because it'll tell you pretty much what the problem is in a lot of cases. Okay, so it tells us, and here's the program that I'm running. I'm running it on Python 3.6. So if you need help from me, please include this information so I know everything that I can possibly know to help you fix it. So it's telling me, here's the file, here is the line 71. It says y equals charlie.ycore. And it says attribute error, list object has no attribute ycore. So all of these things are clues as to what the problem is here. So I'm going to scroll down to look at line 71. Okay, so far so good. So I'm looking at a couple things here. So this person has called their objects Charlie and a list Charlies. and list. So now here's an interesting thing. You see how this says list. Okay, now your IDE or whatever program you're using might tell you that, but that is actually a clue to why this isn't working. Okay, so Charlie is supposed to be a turtle object. That's why the code says charlie.yCore parentheses. If you use the .yCore method on a turtle, it will give you the current y coordinate of that object. Okay, so we're assigning that to a variable called y, which kind of makes sense. And the error says list object has no attribute yCore. Okay. So what it's saying is whatever this is, and again, your IDE or whatever you're using might not pop this up, probably won't. If it doesn't, this tells us everything we need to know. It thinks that Charlie is a list, not a, how do I put it, not a turtle. Okay, so this is actually a pretty hard problem to sort out, because the problem isn't actually in this section of the code. I need to go all the way up where it made, where the program makes all the different Charlies. Okay, so you can see we made a list, and this is good practice here. So we've got a list, and it has a plural name, so we know there's multiple objects. In Python, I would keep this lowercase because that's the preferred method, but it'll still work. So we're going to make 20 different objects. We've made a Charlie, and we've done all these kinds of things with Charlie. And then what we want to do is we want to append Charlie to the list. So our list, as we said, is Charlie's. But you can see here, the programmer made a simple little mistake. It's adding the list to itself every single time. So that's why we've got a list in there and not a turtle. So I'm just going to delete that, because it should be Charlie, 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 Charlie. Now I'm going to run it. And you can see now it is actually falling. Now, this is running really slowly. That's a different issue, but yeah, so that is that. Now there are 20 there, they just happen to be on top of each other. That's why we can't see them. Okay, so that was how I kind of tracked down that little error there. Okay, so let's move on to example 3. So example 3 is from my Space Invaders tutorial, and so I'm going to clear this so we start fresh, and let's run it and see what happens. Okay, you can't really see it, but the window actually opened up here on my other monitor, and then we got this error message. So just like before, I'm going to stop. I'm going to look at the traceback, okay, and see what the error is. So first of all, the error is in line 53. Okay, so that's important to know. And we look at the message says turtle on key move right, capital right, and the error is that move right is not defined. So if you know a little bit about the onKey method, move right is going to be a function or some sort of command of that nature. So we have to look at where we defined the move right function or method, depending on how you want to call it. So we've got move left, and here's our move right. Now looking at this, I can tell you exactly what the problem is. This function is defined inside another function, which is not a good thing. So all we have to do is to unindent that so that these are in the same indentation level with the rest of the program. So now it is being defined. So I'm going to run this and go from and just check that. And I'll get to your question in a second. Okay. So now I've got a different error message, which is good. This means we've made progress. I'm going to again look at the traceback. Okay, and you'll see delay equals raw input. Press A, and it says name error. Raw input is not defined. Now this is a very common error depending on what you're running. My earlier tutorials were written in Python 2, 2.7, and now I've switched to Python 3.6. I'm running now, as you can see down here. So yeah, so raw input was changed in Python 3 to input. So now I'm going to fix that and run it again and test it. And I am very happy to report that it is up. I can move left. Now there's a different bug in the program because I can only move left and I can't move right. So let's go and fix that one real quick while we're at it. So the first thing I'm going to look at here is, are the keyboard bindings working? Just so you know, you only need turtle listen one time. So move left, move right. Left is associated with the left arrow. Move right is associated with the right arrow. All good. So I come up here to move the player left and right. So moving left, X minus equals player speed. So left is minus. And then here, which I expected, is we need to make that a plus. Because X is plus to the right, it is minus to the left. Y is plus up, and it is minus down. So let me run that again. I hope. There we go. And just test that. Left arrow and right arrow. So now we have our player moving left and right. So we had some syntax errors, we had some logic errors, all kinds of different problems in that particular program. Real quick, I just want to answer a question here I got from Desassine. And again, my apologies if I mispronounced it. It says, VS Code, which plugins do you use to develop Python? To be honest, I just use the default Python plugin, whatever that was. So when I installed the program and I saved my first Python program, it said something about, you're using Python, please install whatever this plugin is. I'm not a big plugin person, to be perfectly honest. I like to do as a raw text editor approach as much as possible. The pop-ups are useful, I think, especially for beginners and people who are just learning, and for me to demonstrate on my videos. But for me, I just like to kind of, I just trust the error messages, and if I need to debug, I just use print statements. I'm kind of old-fashioned like that. So anyway, thanks for watching, and thanks for the question. So I hope that helps, at least in some way. So that was example 3. Moving right along, we're making good progress here. Example number 4. This is also Space Invaders, and it's from Jason Lee. So thanks, Jason, for posting that. And let me run that real quick and see what the problem is. Okay, so this is an interesting one. So here's Space Invaders. The player is moving, but none of the invaders are moving up here. So that is a logic error of some sort. So let's take a look. You're quite welcome, Desassine. Happy to help. And let's see here. Okay, so we've added them. So we need to find the part in the program where they should be moving. Okay, and the way at least the programs I've set up work is you have all of your, and I assume most programs, you set up your program like up here. So this is all the stuff that happens, just getting your program ready. You're adding the enemies, you're adding the missile, your code to move the player left and right. You have some functions here as well, and etc., etc. Do your keyboard bindings. And here we have our main game loop. Okay, so since the player's moving, but the enemies are not. So the problem has to be down here in this main loop. And so first thing I'm going to look for is this line here. So this is what actually cycles through each enemy. So for enemy in enemies, and this is where it says it moves the enemy. And then down here, moves the enemy back down. And then it checks for collisions, etc., etc. So when I first saw this problem, I assumed the problem was here somewhere. In the sense that probably what I thought was that you had a for loop, or either didn't have a for loop or didn't indent properly. That was my first guess. But I'm looking at the code, and the code structure looks really, really good. So that makes me think, okay, the problem is somewhere else. And these are harder problems to solve than a syntax error, because you notice there's no error message down here. So you've written it correctly. It just doesn't do what you think it's supposed to do. So the syntax is correct. It's like your spelling is correct, but it just doesn't make any sense. Okay, so I'm going to go up to here and take a look at where we created the enemies. Okay. Now this is a very, very subtle error, and I see this a lot. And actually, now that I've programmed a little bit more, I've done some more things. I realize maybe the way I've structured this in the code isn't that clear. Well, it's clear, but maybe there's a better way to do it. So what we've done here, and I do mention this in the video, but it's kind of a throwaway line, so I think people miss it. So here I have created the enemies. Okay, so for So enemies.append turtle.turtle. So what that does is it adds a turtle object to the enemies list, which is similar to one of the other examples we had earlier. And then what I do is I use called a for each loop. For each enemy in the enemies list, and those are turtles, we need to change the color, shape, etc., etc. However, what's happening is this line. This is what's messing everything up. So for enemy and enemies, I start with the first enemy on this list. Okay? And then I want the first enemy change the color, first enemy change the shape, first enemy pen up, etc. Come back around, second enemy, third enemy. But what happens is this line is actually creating a brand new enemy each time. And that enemy is not even on this list. So these are separate objects. So this is where the problem is coming in. And now what I might do is I might actually do this a little bit differently. Is I would structure the code like this. Actually, I will undo that because I'm going to need that line now. So what I might do now with this particular code, doing this will fix it. That's all we need to do. But just while you're here, I might restructure this a little bit. And then down here, what I would do is I would append it at the end. So I'm going to say add the enemy to the list. Okay. So I choose the number of enemies, which was 5 in this case. I create the enemy as a turtle, color, blah, 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 blah. I append that. Oops, going to change that. I append that to the enemies list. I wrap around second one, wrap around third one, so on and so forth, up to 5. Let's test that and see how it goes. Okay, and there we go. We've got our enemies moving, and they are dropping down as expected. Hey there, coding bro. You are second. Welcome. Have a nice drink of water there. Okay, so that one is, we'll call that solved. All right, got 2 more to go. So let's take a look here. And again, I'm happy to help people. People that message me and say, yeah, my program's not working. But what you have to do is you need to share that code with me on Pastebin. I cannot magically guess what's wrong with your program. Okay, even if you share the error message, a lot of times that doesn't help, as you're seeing here. Okay, so let's get to number 5. This is from Ismet Temuchin. Again, my apologies for any mispronunciations. So let's run it and see what happens. Okay, the window opened. You couldn't see it because it was on my other monitor. And we've got our traceback. So by now you're seeing a pattern. Okay, if there is a syntax error or a runtime error and the program stops, we're always going to check the traceback. Okay, if there isn't, of course, it's a little bit harder to sort out. Okay, so you'll see here the error is in line 14, at least it thinks so. Again, that's not always accurate, but as we saw earlier, the error can actually be caused like way up higher in the program. But it's a good guide in a lot of cases, a good place to start. And it says name error. It says border pen is not defined. So what that's telling you is the computer does not know what border pen means. Okay, and this one is actually already on the screen if you can take a look. So let's go to line 14. You'll see here border pen equals speed 0. And you're like, okay, well, it says this is not defined. So we got to go up to where we defined it. And you'll see this equal sign. So we're actually defining border pen as a turtle object, turtle.turtle. And you just see here, this was a very simple spelling mistake. This is something, you know, anybody can do. I do it all the time. I reverse letters. So let's run that and check it. Okay, now we've got a different error. Okay, so that's good. So that tells us we've probably fixed this error, and common sense would tell us that as well. So again, let's take a look at the traceback. Okay, so line 15, border pen color white, and it says attribute error, turtle object has no attribute color. Now, if you are American, you already know what the problem is probably. This to me is very weird. I'm American, but I live in Japan. I've lived in Romania. I've lived, you know, in different countries, so I am aware that other people do spell English differently, especially the British. It's actually their language, and we kind of borrowed it, I guess, as a way of putting it. Anyway, so color needs to be spelled the American style. I find that very weird that nobody's ever just said, hey, let's add an alias, and if somebody uses color with a U, let's allow that. It's a note for the Python turtle developers. So I've changed color with a U to color with an O, just an O, or two O's, and I'm going to run that and see if that works. And yes, it does. Okay, so I think that's all this person has. This person doesn't have any other code beyond that. So yeah, that's it. That's the end of the program. So that one. Okay, so spelling is important, as we've seen. And then the last one is example number 6. Okay, and this is from my snake game tutorial. And I'm going to run it and see what happens. Okay, so the program is running. I don't have any errors so far. So I'm going to see if I can move my snake. Okay, up, down, left, right. Okay, nothing is happening. So I actually don't know what the problem is with this one. Well, let's take a look at the code and see if we can figure out what's supposed to happen. Up, down, left, right. Okay. Whoa, okay. Interesting. Okay, let's take a look here. Let's walk through it and see how it's supposed to function. If you've watched the snake game tutorial, oh, that's one thing that might be missing. Hang on, sorry, let me just check this. Nope, that's there. Okay, so let's see. Snake head. So we have the snake heads on the screen. That's a good sign. The food is on the screen. That's a good sign. Okay, we have a function that makes our head direction up. We have a function that makes our head direction down. Let's make sure, but when it starts, it's at stop. So one thing I might do here is I might push it to up, okay? And so when it starts, it should move up. And it does. It does. It gave me an error, but it does move up. Okay, so that tells me there's a problem somewhere with the keyboard binding or something like that. So I'm going to put that back to stop. And def go up. Ah, okay. Well, that was my mistake. When I programmed this, I used the up arrows and not W, A, S, and D. So that was not the problem. So my apologies. But that's one of the things. It's when you're debugging somebody else's work, it takes time sometimes just to figure out those little things. You know, I was expecting the arrows to work, and here they had chosen W, A, S, D. So let me run that one more time. Oops. Okay, and now it is working. Okay, and if I hit the borders, it restarts, which is what it's supposed to do. Okay, now here's where the error comes in if I get the food. Okay, so you can see there the actual segment was added, which is good. That was a good sign. But then we got an error. So let's take a look at this, our traceback. Now this is what we call a runtime error. A runtime error is where the program starts and then it dies at some point. So it does start running. You know, syntax error never runs. Runtime error, it runs, but then it stops. And then a logic error is an error where it runs. Actually, it runs, but it doesn't do what you expect it to do. So let's take a look at this. So it says line 107, and it says for index and range length segments, object of type turtle has no length. Okay, so the length method, the len method, is used with objects such as strings. It tells us how many characters are in there. It's used with lists to tell us how many items are on the list. And segments should be a list. Okay, so you can see here where it says segments list. But we're getting an error. Okay, so it's saying object of type turtle has no length. Okay, so what this tells me is that when the program gets here, it thinks that this list is a turtle. So that tells me that at some point, segments was changed from a list. Let's go up here and check. I know I saw it somewhere. Segments, this is where we made segments a list. At some point, I've changed that into a turtle. And as I'm searching down through, I found the error here. Well, at least I think. Okay, for segments in segments. Okay, so that's for the list in the list, which doesn't make any sense. So this should be singular. Okay, so this is something I always tell my students. If you're making a list, make it plural. And then that way when you iterate through the list and you go through item by item, if you make this singular, okay, and I know not everybody's first language is English, of course, so we want each individual segment to do that. Okay, so hide the segments. So for each segment in segments, that segment should go to 1000, 1000. We moved it off screen. Then segments clear. Okay, this will clear the list. Now note, clear was added in, I think, Python 3.3. So if you're using Python 2.7 or an earlier version, it doesn't work. You need to do segments equals like that. But clear is better if you have that option. Okay, so now I've definitely fixed that. So let's try it and see what happens. Okay, so program's there. I'm going to go up. Okay, now I've got same error. Okay, still in 107. So I fixed it here, but it didn't fix it anywhere else. So that means there's another similar thing somewhere else. I hope. Okay, so again, we've got 4 segments in segments. Segment. Okay, so this person just copied and pasted it, which again, this is something I definitely recommend, is copying and pasting. But you don't copy and paste until you test code and to make sure it works. Okay, so this is another thing that beginners do all the time, and I try to get my students to say, type a little bit of code, test it, make sure it works. If it works, then you can copy it. Okay, so I'm going to run that again. Bring it down. Okay, now we've got our little snake moving around. Got a little body, and the body is getting longer. And again, you got to test your code, make sure it works. I got my snake going, and then I'm going to run in the wall and see what happens. Okay, body's gone. Okay, I think we've got a working snake game. So that was that. So that was 6 little examples of debugging that I've done for viewers who have kindly shared their code with me on pastebin.com. But I hope that people will watch this and learn how to, debug their own code. In a lot of cases, it's either a simple spelling mistake or it's a simple error, something that really even a beginner should be able to figure out. You just really have to read those error messages, which is the main thing that beginners will see. I also have a tutorial where it's the top 5 errors made by a beginner. So if you check that out, if I'm able to, I'll add a link down below later. And also, I think I mentioned earlier, I do have a new newsletter that I'm working on to send out Python tips and announcements of stuff I've done. So I'll put the link for that below, and I hope you sign up. Anyway, I hope you got something out of this. There's any quick questions for anybody, and if not, I will have to sign off. Going once, going twice. Okay, that was about 30 minutes. So thank you, Desicine and Coding Bruh, for joining me. I think there's one other person. That might just be me. But yeah, I do appreciate you guys checking it out. And I hope later somebody gets some use out of this. Okay, take care. And as I like to say, keep on coding. I will figure out how to stop this in a second. Have a good one.